The sterile white walls of the art gallery hummed with the electric chatter of San Francisco's elite. I rested a hand on the swell of my stomach,
Ignore me like this.
9 months into a
Don't talk
pregnancy that
about
felt
it. Let's
like the
go.
only real thing in a world of glass and steel. This was supposed to be our triumphant year, my husband's and mine. But I wasn't here tonight to celebrate. I was here to detonate the beautiful lie our life had become. My fingers tightened on the folded bank statement in my pocket as I navigated the crowded room. Julian, my brilliant venture capitalist husband, believed I was at home resting. For a moment, watching the city's power brokers sip champagne,
Look at me.
everything felt
Get
surreal.
away from him.
Then I heard
know
his
what you
laugh,
did.
a smooth, confident sound that I used to love. It echoed from across the room, where he stood beside the gallery's featured artist, a woman whose name was now seared into my brain. Chloe. My breath caught. I'd hoped the grainy social media photos were wrong, but there she was, undeniably real. Chloe Sterling, the art world's new darling, whose career Julian had so generously mentored. She was a vision of bohemian chic, all sharp angles and artistic flair, standing beside a sculpture I now understood with sickening clarity. Julian, impeccable in a Tom Ford suit, had his hand on the small of her back, and next to them was a small, engraved plaque. She was all effortless grace and ambition, a stark contrast to the heavy, weary reality of my own body. A knot of ice formed in my chest. I suddenly felt clumsy and conspicuous in my simple maternity dress. Julian's gaze scanned the room, a king surveying his court. It slid right past me, completely blank, before snapping back, a flicker of shock finally registering. A frown marred his handsome face, a flash of pure annoyance, as if my presence was a colossal scheduling error. Chloe's eyes followed his, her expression shifting from radiant to a sharp, possessive curiosity. I could almost see the gears turning in her head. Before I could lose my nerve, I walked directly toward them, stopping in front of the sculpture. "The title is My North Star," I said, my voice quiet but cutting through the ambient noise. How poetic. Julian's smile vanished, replaced by a mask of cold fury. Chloe's perfectly curated smile tightened at the edges. I unfolded the bank statement. Funny, the wire transfer for $50,000 just says, "For private commission." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden, focused silence of those nearest to us. I felt a dozen pairs of eyes land on me, the polite interest of the gallery patrons turning into unabashed fascination. Then I looked from the statue to Chloe and back to my husband. "Is this what you've been investing in, Julian?" The question hung in the air, a declaration of war. His face turned to stone. My legs felt weak, but I refused to buckle. In that single moment, I knew the carefully constructed facade of our perfect life was gone forever, shattered on the polished concrete floor of this gallery. And across the room, a man who had been interviewing the gallery owner lowered his notepad, his gaze fixed on our little drama. He was about to become an unexpected variable in an equation I hadn't even begun to solve. For a second, the room tilted, and the gallery felt less like a party and more like an interrogation chamber. Julian stood perfectly still, attempting to radiate an aura of bored condescension, as if my accusation was merely a symptom of late-stage pregnancy hormones. But I saw the muscle jump in his jaw, the barely suppressed panic behind his eyes. He cleared his throat. "Isla, you're making a scene. We can discuss your confusion at home." The sheer nerve of him trying to gaslight me here was staggering. Before I could answer, Chloe stepped forward, her voice a silken weapon. "Julian, darling, who is this?" she asked, her eyes wide with feigned innocence, casting me as the unhinged stranger. "She seems terribly overwrought. Perhaps she needs some water?" The calculated pity in her tone was designed to dismiss me, to paint me as pathetic. A hot surge of adrenaline sharpened my resolve. I wanted to scream, to expose them for the casual, devastating cruelty of their betrayal. But Julian spoke first, his voice low and laced with menace, meant only for me. You are mistaken about what you think you see. I suggest you leave now, before you completely embarrass yourself. The lie was so bald, so absolute. My hand trembled, holding the proof. The memories flooded in, sharp and painful. Me, 8 months pregnant, finding the late-night texts about inspiration and muses. Me, home alone, while he was at investor dinners that were actually gallery meetings. Me, watching him pour millions into other people's futures, while he grew more and more distant from the one we were supposed to be building together. He had been writing me out of his life, one secret investment at a time. I straightened my shoulders. I am not mistaken about anything, I said, my voice steady now, and loud enough for those nearby to hear clearly. Especially not about your signature on this transfer. Julian's jaw tightened. He despised being challenged, especially with an audience. Chloe placed a delicate hand on his arm. Julian, please, let's not engage, she murmured, expertly playing the role of the dignified artist being harassed. This woman is clearly unstable. The words were a deliberate, final attempt to frame me as crazy. I turned, my eyes burning but refusing to shed tears. I would not give them that satisfaction. As I took a step away, a wave of dizziness washed over me. My body chose that exact moment to betray me. My knees buckled. From behind me, someone moved quickly. A calm voice cut through the noise. Easy there. No one in your condition should have to deal with this. I turned my head. It was the man with the notepad, the journalist. His expression wasn't pitying, just decent, as he offered a steadying arm. His intervention was about to change the entire dynamic of the night in a way I never could have imagined. The man helped me to a nearby bench, his presence a small island of calm in the churning sea of my life. He was the opposite of Julian. No designer suit, just a worn leather jacket, jeans, and intelligent eyes that didn't look away from the ugly truth of what he'd just witnessed. He handed me a bottle of water from his bag. Take a second, he said, his voice even. What just happened was designed to throw you off balance. Don't let it. I looked up at him, my throat tight. Who are you? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The man offered a small, reassuring smile. My name is Leo. I was covering this opening for the Chronicle, and I couldn't help but see what happened. I'm really sorry you had to go through that. I took a shaky sip of water, trying to compose myself. In my world, people didn't step in. They stepped back and whispered. But Leo was looking right at me. From across the room, Julian let out a sharp, disgusted sound. You have no business getting involved in this. Leo stood up, turning to face Julian, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Julian's simmering rage. I know what I saw, he said plainly. I saw a man publicly humiliate his pregnant wife in favor of his mistress. That's a pretty clear picture. Chloe gasped theatrically, her artistic facade starting to crumble. This is a deeply personal matter, she snapped, her voice losing its silky quality. Leo's expression was unreadable. It certainly is. And integrity is a pretty important part of a personal brand. The words landed like stones. Julian's eyes darted around, suddenly aware of how bad this looked. Chloe, we're leaving. Now. They made their exit, not with grace, but like fugitives fleeing a crime scene. As they vanished toward the door, a profound sense of relief washed over me. I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. Thank you, I whispered to Leo. You really didn't have to do that. I know, he said, his tone matter of fact. but watching powerful people bully others and saying nothing has never felt right to me. There was a conviction in his voice that resonated deep within me. "Can I call you a car?" Leo asked. "Or get you home?" I nodded, still feeling shaky. A car would be great. As he pulled out his phone, a thought began to form in my mind. Journalists who cover the city's elite don't just appear and play hero by coincidence. I was suddenly certain that our encounter here, in this gallery, at this exact moment, was anything but a random act of kindness. We were waiting by the entrance when the gallery doors slid open again. The sharp, furious click of Julian's Italian leather shoes echoed on the floor. I didn't need to look. My stomach plunged. He was back. Leo saw the shift in my posture and moved, standing slightly in front of me as Julian strode toward us. It wasn't an aggressive move, just a simple physical statement, creating a clear boundary. Julian's face was a thundercloud of fury, his eyes fixed on Leo as if he were the sole architect of his public relations disaster. "I want to know what you think you're doing," he snarled, his voice a low growl. Leo raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "Right now? I'm waiting for a car for your wife. Did you have a different plan?" "It looks to me," Julian shot back, "like you're a bottom feeder looking for a story by exploiting a private marital dispute." "That's funny," Leo countered, his voice dangerously mild. "I was thinking you're a powerful man who just turned a private dispute into a very public spectacle." Chloe was nowhere in sight. "This was just between us now. This is getting completely out of hand," she declared, her tone just a bit too sharp. "We were just confirming the final sequence for the presentation. That's it." The excuse was flimsy, transparent. Her gaze was fixed on me, sharp and calculating, as if she were cataloging my weaknesses for a later, more strategic strike. Julian folded his arms across his designer blazer. "Chloe, I have no idea what you think you're accomplishing, but involving some random philanthropist in our private life is a new low, even for you." That was it. The final thread holding me together tore. "Julian," I said, my voice eerily steady, "in 5 minutes, this random philanthropist has shown our son more consideration than you have his entire 9 months." His features hardened into a cool, indifferent mask. Anya glided to his side, her voice dripping with fake solicitude. "Chloe, honey, you should really sit down. All this excitement can't be good for you, in your state." Leo inhaled sharply, a quiet sound that cut through the tension. "That's enough." The entire atmosphere in the room changed. He hadn't raised his voice, but his words landed like anchors, an immovable force their petty insults shattered against. "The two of you need to walk away now," he stated simply. "She is clearly under duress. Stop attempting to paint her as unstable." Julian opened his mouth to retort, but he stopped. A strange expression crossed his face. Was it just surprise? Or was it the dawning recognition of a power he hadn't accounted for? I couldn't tell, but the way he stared at Leo, it was the first time that night his supreme confidence had faltered. Anya tugged at his sleeve. "Let's just go, Julian. She's just making a spectacle of herself." They started to move away, but Julian threw one last inquisitive glance at Leo, as if trying to place a man who didn't fit into his meticulously curated network. A name that was right on the tip of his tongue. And in that brief second, the first fissure appeared in the perfect, polished facade of their world. As soon as Julian and Anya were gone, Leo quietly offered me the bottle of water he was holding. It was a minimalist glass bottle of some ridiculously expensive artesian water, the kind that costs $15 and is ubiquitous in Silicon Valley boardrooms. My hands shook as I accepted it, but my eyes were fixed on the exit where my husband had just disappeared. "What did I ever do?" I breathed, "to make his ambition so much more important than us?" The words felt like swallowing razors. I wrapped a hand protectively around my stomach. You did nothing to warrant this. My bottom lip began to tremble. I looked up at this kind-faced stranger, my expression screaming that he couldn't possibly understand. Leo leaned in a fraction, his voice both gentle and resolute. "Listen to me," he said. "How a man blinded by his own ego chooses to act is never, ever a reflection of your worth." Before I could absorb his words, a fresh wave of murmurs swept through the high-tech venue. People were turning to the enormous holographic display on the main stage, whispering and then casting shocked glances in our direction. My stomach plunged. Anya was standing by the control panel, her phone subtly aimed at it, orchestrating the scene. The display, which should have been showing off the new AI's capabilities, was now projecting a three-dimensional memory, a crystal-clear, intimate video of her and Julian on a beach trip I never knew happened. "It's just so tragic," she said loudly to a nearby journalist, her voice engineered to carry. "Some men just aren't wired for the pressures of starting a family. You can see how he's been forced to seek support elsewhere." The air in the room went still. 100 pairs of eyes were now on me, a vile cocktail of pity and morbid curiosity. My heart pounded against my ribs. "That's not—" "He's lying about everything." My words were a choked whisper. Anya sighed for effect. "Chloe, my love, if you're finding it hard to manage your emotions, there are professionals who can help." Leo stepped forward, his relaxed posture instantly replaced by something as rigid and formidable as a skyscraper's frame. "Turn it off." Anya feigned confusion. "I'm sorry?" "You heard me," Leo repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "Shut down that projection, now." Julian stormed back over, his face red with fury. "Who the hell do you think you are? You can't come in here and give orders." Leo's expression was unreadable. "You are actively orchestrating the public humiliation of your pregnant wife. I'm sure your investors would find that fascinating." He then looked Julian dead in the eye, his voice dropping. "Or, better yet, maybe I should just place a call to the ethics committee at Sterling Ventures? I'm guessing they take the character of their portfolio CEOs very seriously." For the first time all night, raw panic flashed in Julian's eyes. "How do you know who my investors are?" he stammered. Leo paid him no attention, his gaze sliced through Anya's smug expression. "You have 5 seconds." Her smirk finally evaporated. A few guests had their phones out, recording the fresh drama unfolding. The whispering intensified. Finally buckling under the pressure, Anya lowered her phone and spat. "Fine," motioning for a technician to cut the feed. But Leo wasn't finished. Julian frantically waved over the event manager, who was already rushing toward them, with a panicked look. "Get this man out of my launch event, now!" But he was too slow. Anya froze, mid-sip of her champagne. My own face felt cold and numb. In an instant, the lavish party designed to celebrate Julian's genius had become the stage for his complete disgrace, and the fallout was absolute. The manager fumbled with his earpiece, his eyes darting from the blank projector to me, to Julian, and to the woman who was so obviously his mistress. He signaled to a uniformed security guard who was already approaching them. "Let's have them escorted out." Julian stopped dead, all the blood drained from Anya's face, and just like that, the humiliation they had so carefully designed for me was thrown back in their faces, magnified 10 times over. The guard approached, his posture professional as he assessed the scene. "Is there a problem here, Mr. Croft?" he asked, his tone suggesting he already knew there was. Leo explained with perfect calm. "This woman was intentionally broadcasting private recordings to publicly shame Mr. Croft's wife. There are about 100 witnesses, including members of the press. The guard's face became a stoic mask. "Sir, ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises." Anya's jaw dropped. "Are you kidding me? She's the one who's hysterical." Julian grabbed her arm, his grip tight. "Anya, be quiet." But she was incandescent with rage. She turned to the captivated audience. "This is an insane overreaction. I was just sharing a beautiful memory." Leo's calm voice cut through her frantic lies like a laser. "Cruelty and creativity are two very different things." Julian exhaled a shaky breath. "Let's just go." But as they turned toward the exit, I felt a tiny, determined kick from within, a small flutter of life. I instinctively laid a hand over my stomach. "No, little one. None of this is on you." And in that moment, something inside me didn't just shatter. It reforged itself into something stronger, something that would never again make itself smaller for him. For years, I had shrunk myself to fit inside his world. I had tiptoed around the moods of the man who was meant to be my partner. I had shouldered the shame of his emotional distance as if it were my own personal failing. But feeling my child move while its father was walking out with another woman, that was the catalyst that awakened a fire I thought had long gone out. I stood up straighter. "Actually," I said, my voice ringing out in the sudden hush, loud enough for Julian to hear perfectly, "you owe your son an explanation." He stopped, his back still to me. Anya spun around. "What did you just say to him?" Leo stood next to me, a silent, grounding presence, as if he knew this confrontation was necessary. I raised my chin. "This is your son, Julian. This baby can't see what you've done yet, but I can. And the least you owe him is an acknowledgement of the family you are walking away from." A wave of shocked gasps went through the crowd. Julian's face was chalky white. "Not now, Chloe. This isn't the place." "Why not?" I challenged. "Because you don't have the privacy of our own home to manipulate me into thinking I'm crazy? Because you have to answer for it in front of a crowd?" For a long, agonizing moment, the room was utterly silent. Then, in a final, defining act of cowardice, Julian turned his back on me and on his unborn child, letting Anya pull him away through the gleaming glass doors. The moment the doors swished shut, the tense energy in the room finally broke. Leo placed a gentle hand on my arm. That was incredibly courageous. But I didn't feel courageous. I felt like I was standing at the epicenter of a massive earthquake, understanding that this wasn't just a tremor, but the catastrophic event that was leveling my entire life. The silence they left behind was deafening. I cradled my stomach, my breathing unsteady. I tried to anchor myself, to focus on the life growing inside me. Leo gave me a quiet moment before speaking again. "Are you going to be all right?" His voice was low, but it had a dependable, solid quality to it, like a man who was accustomed to building things that were meant to endure. I managed a small nod, even as my world lay in pieces around me. "I will be." He hesitated, then crossed to a now-abandoned catering station and came back with a fresh glass of water. "Here," he said, holding it out to me. "You look like you could use this." I took it, my fingers grazing his. "Thank you," I whispered. Leo offered a small, reassuring smile. "Of course." I was amazed by how he carried himself with such understated confidence. There was no pity in his gaze, only a profound, unwavering respect. A tiny flicker of warmth managed to pierce the deep, isolating chill in my soul. "I should probably get out of here," I said, suddenly conscious of the fact that we were still the focus of everyone's attention. Leo shook his head slightly. "You have nothing to be embarrassed about." "They do." But he stepped back, giving me the space I needed as I walked toward the exit to call a car. As the sommelier brought my wrap, he leaned close and said quietly, "That man who helped you," he motioned, with his head toward Julian. He's Julian Vance, the chef. He created the entire menu for tonight. I managed a weak smile but didn't dare look back. Outside, the sharp Boston air was a welcome jolt. I pulled my cashmere wrap tighter, instinctively shielding my baby from the biting wind. My heart felt like a piece of shattered porcelain, the vision for my future smashed beyond repair. Just then, Julian came through the revolving doors behind me. Isabella. I spun around, shocked he'd followed me. I don't think I ever told you my name. Look, he said, searching for the right words. I wasn't planning to get involved, but what he did in there was just wrong. And if you ever need someone to help you create a new recipe for your life, I would be honored to help. His offer was so unexpected, it stole my breath. People didn't just offer help like that, not to strangers. Why? I asked, my voice a faint whisper. He gave a slight shrug, a simple gesture that seemed to hold a universe of conviction. Because I've built my life on combining the right elements with care to create something wonderful. I think people deserve that same chance. An undeniable honesty shone in his eyes. Before I could think of what to say, my Uber pulled up to the curb. Mommy, can Chef Julian walk with us? It's really dark down there. Julian's expression softened. I would be happy to. As the three of us walked into the vast, silent underground garage, a strange, light feeling began to settle over me. It felt as though this kind man was already becoming part of our story. The garage was nearly empty, and the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to echo in the cold, concrete space. My older model Audi was parked under one of those humming lights, looking like a forgotten classic, among the newer, sleeker cars. I clicked the unlock button, and Leo scrambled into his car seat, clutching a small pastry box like it was a treasure he wasn't sure he was allowed to keep. I just stood there for a moment, watching my breath turn to mist in the chilly air, my fingers trembling. Every nerve in my body felt exposed and raw, a sickening mix of humiliation, white-hot anger, and a sorrow so deep I couldn't yet name it, were at war inside me. Julian stopped a few feet away, giving me space, but his quiet presence felt like an anchor in the storm of my emotions. You don't seem okay, he noted gently. I'm fine, I lied, the words tasting like ash. No, you're not. His words weren't an accusation. They were a simple statement of fact. Hearing that truth spoken aloud was the final blow to my crumbling self-control. My vision blurred with tears. I pressed my hand hard against my mouth, fighting to hold back the sob that was clawing its way up my throat, but it was no use. The sound tore out of me, a broken, wounded cry in the stillness of the garage. I just can't wrap my head around it. How a man can just edit his own unborn child out of his life story, pretending this pregnancy isn't even happening. Julian let out a long, slow breath, a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken griefs. Some people find it easier to delete a chapter than to learn how to live with the story they've written. A knot formed in my throat, but this baby isn't a bad chapter. Of course not, he agreed, his voice instantly gentle. Anyone with eyes can see this is a gift. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyelids. All I wanted was one quiet evening, just one single, normal charity auction to support my husband's company. You still deserve that, he said softly. You're allowed to have more moments of peace than you have of turmoil. The kindness in his voice was a strange, warm pressure in my chest, a feeling so foreign it was almost like hope. When I finally lowered my hands, his eyes held no trace of pity, only a deep and unnerving understanding. You are more resilient than you know, Isabella. Tonight proved that. My breath hitched in my throat. I don't feel resilient. You don't have to, he replied. You just have to keep going. But there was something in his voice that was less like a platitude and more like a promise, and I was hit with the sudden, dizzying sense that our lives were now connected in a way that went far beyond a chance meeting at a fundraiser. I dabbed at my eyes with my sleeve, taking a shuddering breath. Leo was safely buckled in, mesmerized by a game on a tablet, looking so small against the backdrop of the Boston skyline. Julian stood beside my car, his hands tucked into the pockets of his slacks. "If it's all right with you," he began, his voice low, "I'll wait here until you've driven out of the garage, just to be sure you're both safe." I gave him a small, thankful nod. "Thank you. You've been incredibly kind." But before I could start the car, the near-silent hum of a powerful electric motor filled the space. A silver Lucid Air swept around the corner and stopped sharply behind my car, blocking me in. My stomach plummeted. Marcus. He got out so quickly, the driver's side door swung shut behind him. His face was a tight mask of cold fury. The polished public persona was gone, replaced by something calculated and cruel. "Isabella." His voice was a low growl. "We are not finished." Julian moved with an easy grace, placing himself like a calm barrier between Marcus and me. "I think it's time for you to leave, Mr. Thorne." Marcus's eyes were locked on me. He gestured angrily. "You had no business causing a scene in front of my board members. Do you have any idea how that reflects on me?" I let out a laugh, a sharp, bitter sound. "The reflection you care about more than your own child?" His jaw clenched. "That is not what this is about, and you know it." I'm not the one who rewrote our story in front of 500 people, but Marcus's rage had now split. His glare shifted to Julian, burning with a fresh, possessive fire. "And who the hell are you?" Marcus sneered. "The catering staff coming to the rescue?" Julian's posture didn't change. "It's not your concern." Marcus took a step forward, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think you can just insert yourself into my family's affairs?" Elias didn't even blink, but the air around them grew thick with tension. "Your family's affairs. You're the one who put them on a stage under a spotlight. Don't try to change the narrative now because you don't like the reviews." Marcus's face grew dark. "If you say another word, I promise you I will." Julian cut him off, his voice still level. "You'll what? Have me blacklisted? Seems to be your preferred method for dealing with complications." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Marcus looked like a man about to come apart, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. I could see Leo's small face watching us from the car. "Stop," I said, my voice sharp and clear. "Marcus, just go." His glare shot from me to Julian and then to the car, where my hand was protectively covering my stomach. For a fraction of a second, something other than anger crossed his face. It was fear, not of Julian, but of the perfect world he had constructed for himself, completely imploding. He backed down. "This isn't finished," he snapped. He got back into his car and sped away, the tires making a faint, angry hum on the concrete. Only when his taillights disappeared did Julian seem to relax. He looked over at me, his voice quiet. "I have a feeling things are going to get much worse before they get better." I swallowed hard against the lump in my throat, knowing he was right. This was just the first crack in the foundation of Marcus's perfect, curated life. That night, long after Leo was asleep, I sat on my sofa, listening to the city murmur outside the tall windows of my apartment. The rooms felt enormous and empty, the quiet making the hurricane in my mind rage even louder. I couldn't stop seeing it all. The auction, Marcus's chilling speech, Julian's steady presence cutting through the chaos. Every single memory was a fresh wave of dread. My phone buzzed on the cushion beside me. The screen said, "No caller ID." My first impulse was to ignore it, but a cold nod of certainty in my gut told me I had to pick it up. "Hello?" I answered, my voice thin and shaky. A short silence, then a voice I knew better than my own, clipped and controlled. "Isabella, it's Marcus." My blood turned to ice. "What do you want?" He heaved a sigh, the sound of a man burdened by incompetence. "We need to align on a communications strategy. I was out of line tonight." That might be the understatement of the century. "I was ambushed," he countered, before reining in his temper. "Listen, we need to discuss the situation." I squeezed my eyes shut. "You had 6 months to discuss the situation." He steamrolled past the remark. "I'm coming over tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. "No." The word was a stone, its weight surprising me. "You don't get to dictate the terms of my life anymore. This is not a debate, Isabella." "Yes," I said, my voice unwavering. "It is." The line was silent for a few seconds. Then Marcus's tone shifted, becoming smooth and persuasive in a way that made my skin crawl. "Simone feels it would be beneficial for the Series B funding round if we can resolve this complication discreetly and efficiently." And there it was, the raw, hideous truth. "For the funding round," I repeated, feeling a strange numbness spread through me. "Not for our child." His inability to deny it was the only answer I needed. I ended the call before he could utter another syllable. A profound weight of grief and rage settled in my stomach. Marcus didn't want his family. He wanted to mitigate a business risk. And Simone was clearly his partner in the transaction. I pressed my face into my hands, fighting back a fresh wave of tears. A soft but firm knock on my front door made my entire body jump. When the doorbell chimed, I found Leo on my doorstep, holding a cardboard tray with 2 coffees from that artisanal place down in Hayes Valley. "Figured you'd forget to eat," he stated, not asked. I stared, bewildered. "How did you know?" "You have the look of someone who runs on fumes," he said, finishing my thought. "I was in the neighborhood." It was a transparent lie, a kind fabrication that felt like a small, warm blanket. He came inside, placing the coffees on the granite island in my kitchen. "Are you holding up?" I shook my head, abandoning any pretense of being fine. Leo didn't offer a hug or some hollow platitude. He just stood there, his presence a silent grounding anchor. And in that sleek, modern condo, with the Bay Bridge, lights glittering outside, and my life imploding, I felt a sensation I hadn't experienced in years. Grounded. But I was about to find out that feeling grounded often means you have further to fall. The next morning dawned with a hostile, gray fog rolling in from the bay. My sleep had been a chaotic montage of nightmares, all featuring Julian's face, contorted in a mask of cold, strategic fury. I couldn't stop hearing his words. "It's essential for the Series A funding." As if our unborn child was just a bullet point in a pitch deck. I was pouring Oliver some milk when a sharp, authoritative rap echoed from the door. My stomach plunged. "He's not supposed to be here," I murmured, instinctively shielding Oliver with my body. The knock came again, louder this time. "Amelia, I know you're in there. Open the door." Taking a ragged breath, I opened it a few inches, just enough to see him. "What do you want, Julian?" My voice was devoid of emotion. He shoved the door open and stormed into the foyer. "We're going to discuss this, like adults." I stood firm, a human wall blocking his path further into my home. "You can't just force your way in here. It's about my daughter," he retorted, his voice sharp with impatience. "Your daughter?" I laughed, a brittle, ugly sound. "Is that what we're calling her today?" Marcus surveyed the Chicago penthouse, his jaw tight. "Where is she?" I didn't have to say a word. Maya peeked out from behind the living room archway, her little face a portrait of confusion. "Daddy." Marcus's entire demeanor shifted. A strained, camera-ready smile plastered on his face. "Hey there, sweet pea." Maya shrank back against the wall. "Why are you here?" Marcus's smile faltered. "I came to see you, of course." "For the magazine?" Maya asked with the devastating honesty of a 5-year-old. My blood ran cold. Marcus's face turned to granite. "What?" Maya looked down at her light-up shoes. "I heard you practicing with that lady on the phone, the one who makes you sound like a TV dad. You said you needed new pictures for the investors." Marcus's head snapped toward me, his eyes flaring with a toxic blend of anger and pure humiliation. "Did you put those words in her mouth?" Before I could even think of a response, a calm voice cut through the tension from the still open doorway. "She didn't have to." "You've been broadcasting it for weeks." Marcus whirled around. Leo stood there, calm and unbothered, his hands in the pockets of his jacket. My breath caught in my throat. Leo. He entered without asking, coming to stand near me. It wasn't a possessive move, but a clear signal of solidarity. Marcus's face mottled with fury. "What in the hell are you doing here? Did she call her architect for backup?" "Not at all," Leo said, his tone even. But when a man is having a public argument with a key fob in the lobby of a landmark building, people tend to notice. Marcus's voice quivered with outrage. "This is a private family matter. You mean nothing to her." Leo's composure was a stone wall. "And yet, I'm the one she asked to be here." Something in Marcus visibly fractured. "You need to get out of my life. You have no idea what you're messing with." "I know precisely what I'm messing with," Leo interjected, his voice gaining a hard edge. "Marcus Thorne, CEO of Innovate Dynamics. I also know that your new flagship AI, Veritas, is being quietly investigated by a federal ethics committee for data scraping." Marcus just stood there, his mouth slightly agape. "How could you possibly—" Leo took a single, deliberate step forward, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "You should be incredibly careful about whose foundations you try to shake." Marcus turned ashen, and in that moment, it became chillingly obvious that Leo Valdez was much more than the thoughtful architectural historian I'd met over coffee. Marcus stared at Leo, the tech bro arrogance draining from his face, replaced by a fragile, sputtering rage. "You think you can intimidate me by naming my company?" Leo's expression was unreadable. Number 1. I find the truth is usually intimidating enough. A tiny crack formed in Marcus's composure, but it was wide enough for me to see the sheer terror beneath. I finally found my own voice, stepping up to stand shoulder to shoulder with Leo. "You need to leave, Marcus. Whatever this performance is about," I said, gesturing between us. "It's scaring Maya." Marcus sneered. "Oh, right. And I suppose this relic is your new authority on child rearing?" Before I could even reply, Maya's tiny voice cut through the room like a shard of glass. "Mommy?" His voice sounds like thunder. My heart broke into a million pieces. Leo shifted his position slightly, subtly placing himself more directly in Marcus's line of sight. "He's finished making noise," he said, his tone calm and final. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You don't have the authority to speak for me." Leo gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. "Then prove me wrong. Walk out that door and don't say another word." A thick, poisonous silence descended on the room. Marcus glanced around the San Francisco apartment he had co-signed for, and then abandoned. His gaze fell on our daughter, who had his sharp intellect but none of his manufactured charm, and then on me, the wife he assumed would be too overwhelmed to ever push back. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight, not with remorse, but with a deeply wounded ego. "I don't owe either of you an explanation. I'm here to inform you that my legal team is filing for a revised custody agreement with or without your cooperation." A cold wave of dread washed over me. Not this way. Not when it was never about Maya. You have no right to question my motives, Marcus spat. But your new brand strategist does, doesn't she? I retorted. Was it Christine's brilliant idea that a custody battle would look good for your family man image? He flinched, a palpable hit. I pushed forward. This has nothing to do with being a father. It's about crisis management for your company. Tell me I'm wrong. The dead air that followed was the only confirmation I needed. Leo let out a slow, deliberate breath. Marcus, if you take this to court, you will be inviting a level of scrutiny your board of directors will not tolerate. What kind of scrutiny? Marcus snapped back. Leo's expression shifted, losing its academic calm and becoming something harder, more absolute. The kind that digs up every illegally demolished historic site you built on. The kind that exposes the back-channel deals you made with city planning. The kind of scrutiny the people on my board are paid to be masters of. Marcus swallowed, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. It wasn't just panic. It was the sudden, sickening realization that he was completely out of his depth, as if he was just now understanding the true scale of the man in our living room. He backed away toward the door. This isn't over, he stammered, before turning and practically running out, the door slamming shut behind him. Leo looked at me with a sad expression, as if he regretted that his warnings had come true. And in that heavy silence, I understood that Marcus wasn't the only formidable man in the room. After Marcus was gone, the air in the condo felt thick and charged, like the moments after a lightning strike. I leaned against the kitchen counter, rubbing my temples, trying to coax my heart out of my throat. Across the room, Leo stood with his arms crossed, giving me the space to breathe and pull myself together. You were incredible, he said at last, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I managed a weak, joyless laugh. Incredible wasn't the word I would have chosen. A slight, considerate smile touched his lips as he measured his next words. Amelia, he started, his tone serious. I wasn't planning on bringing this up today, but after witnessing that, I can't just stand by while he tries to bulldoze you. I looked up, my guard instantly back up. What are you talking about? Leo reached into his leather satchel and took out a simple, navy blue folder. It didn't have a firm's name on it, just an elegant, embossed crest I didn't recognize. The Golden Gate Heritage Trust. A knot of confusion formed in my stomach. I thought you were an architectural historian, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I am, he confirmed. But that's not all I do. My thoughts were spinning. You work for this trust? Leo shook his head gently. I run it. My family established it a century ago. I just stared at him, trying to reconcile this new reality. The kind, slightly academic man I'd met was Leo Valdez, the head of one of San Francisco's most powerful civic organizations, using his inheritance to preserve the city's history. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Because I needed you to trust the historian, not the endowment. I took a shaky breath, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with unnerving speed. So, why tell me now? Leo's gaze was direct and unwavering. Because I want to offer you our resources, the kind of resources that can protect you from Marcus and give Maya the peace she deserves. What kind of resources? I asked, my pulse hammering against my ribs. He slid the folder across the counter toward me. Our entire legal team. The museum's chairman will connect you with the most formidable divorce attorney in New York, and the board will cover all expenses. I was speechless. Mr. Sterling, I couldn't possibly impose. This isn't a handout, Eleanor, he stated firmly. I've followed your career, seen the passion you bring to every exhibit you curate. You stand up for art that has a voice. The board exists to protect assets like you from vultures like him. My throat closed up. And, he continued, in a lower voice, this gives you the leverage to countersue the moment Arthur tries to use his fortune to silence you. That was it, the brilliant strategy behind the gesture. He wasn't offering a rescue rope. He was handing me a sword. Consider it, he said gently. No rush. But as he walked away, I understood he'd just offered me the first real chance I'd had in a year to get my life back, and everything was about to change forever. All evening, Mr. Sterling's proposition felt like a lighthouse in a hurricane, a beacon of hope I was almost too afraid to look at directly. But the hurricane hadn't passed, and the next tidal wave crashed down the very next morning. I was in a collections meeting when my phone lit up with an alert from a city gossip column. My name was in the title. Eleanor, what on earth is this? My colleague asked, her voice tight with alarm. A wave of nausea rolled through me. She angled her tablet so I could see the screen. An anonymous tip had spawned an article painting me as a desperate social climber who had schemed to entrap a major figure on Wall Street. My veins turned to ice. It fabricated a history of emotional outbursts and questioned my suitability to be a mother. Included was a terrible photo, a grainy, tear-streaked shot Sienna had snapped of me in a cab weeks ago. The air was punched from my lungs. This is all fabricated. I know it's not true, my colleague said, her voice solid, but her eyes filled with worry. But a piece like this, it's meant to cause maximum damage. It's the opening volley in a very public campaign. And that particular accusation was designed to wound more than any professional slander. You just need a little space to yourself, he had said, his voice stripped of all its usual affection. I simply nodded, a silent scream trapped behind my teeth. Just for a bit, until this merger is finalized. The words hit me like stones. My apartment, the only sanctuary I had while carrying our son, was being denied to me because of his affair. As I stepped out onto the Manhattan sidewalk, the bitter January wind whipped off the East River, biting right through my cashmere coat. I couldn't feel my hands. My whole body trembled. The doorman at our Upper East Side building, a kind man named Frank, who had greeted me with a smile for 5 years, looked at me in a way I couldn't decipher. It was more than worry. It was pity. I felt my carefully constructed composure shatter under his gaze. I barely made it into the back of a waiting car before the first sob ripped out of me. My breathing came in ragged gasps as my hands gripped the plush seat. I wasn't weeping for my marriage. I was weeping because Arthur and his art dealer had leveled my life to build theirs. My phone buzzed. An unknown number, one short sentence. A reputation is such a fragile work of art. I'd hate to see yours ruined. S. A deep, cold dread settled in my stomach. Sienna. She wasn't content with just having my husband. She was determined to erase me. As I stared, frozen, at the bright screen, a second text arrived. It was from Arthur. Just checking in. Are you okay? The sheer hypocrisy of it made it hard to breathe. For the first time in my entire life, I felt completely exposed, uncertain if I had the strength to endure another attack. A sickening certainty formed in my gut. This was a war, and Sienna had just fired the opening salvo. I sat motionless in the car, her message on my phone screen burning like acid. My hands were shaking too violently to respond, the iconic New York skyline dissolving into a meaningless blur of lights. I had no idea how much more I could withstand. My position at the museum was now at risk. I was being overtly threatened, and my unborn child had become a pawn in a game he knew nothing about. The phone buzzed again. Arthur, are you back at the apartment? I'm on my way over. I didn't reply. I couldn't. My throat was tight with tears I refused to shed. 15 minutes later, a soft tap on the car's window made me jump. Arthur stood outside, his face a perfect mask of husbandly worry. Eleanor, open the door. I lowered the window an inch. How did you know I was here? You weren't answering your phone. I called the museum. They said you'd left abruptly. His voice was silky, but his eyes held a strange new combination of frustration and a possessiveness that chilled me more than the night air. He bent down to my level. Eleanor, unlock the door. My trembling fingers finally obeyed. He slid into the passenger seat, the heavy door closing with a soft, expensive thud. He let the silence stretch between us, giving me a moment to pull myself together before I could finally speak. They put me on leave, I whispered, because of that article, because of her. His jaw clenched. Let me see. I passed him my phone. Sienna's threatening text was still on the display. His expression was impossible to read. She sent this to you. It's more than that, I said, my voice barely audible. She's trying to sabotage my entire career, and the board is panicking. Arthur leaned his head against the leather headrest, breathing out slowly. This isn't a random act. It's a calculated move. She wants you to feel so trapped that you just give up. Give up what? I whispered. On being in the way, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. A foul taste filled my mouth. I am not trying to be in the way. That doesn't matter to her, he replied. Your existence is an inconvenience. The tears I thought I'd run out of started to stream down my face. How am I supposed to shield our son from this kind of malice? Arthur turned toward me, his voice low but lined with steel. You shield him by refusing to let them destroy you, and you're not going to face this alone. I shook my head, the effort, feeling immense. Arthur, I can't let you help me when you're the reason this is happening. This isn't about assigning blame right now, he interrupted, his tone changing. This is about knowing what it's like to be targeted by people who believe their power makes them invincible. I just stared at him, confused. What are you talking about? He held my gaze for a long, heavy moment. And then he showed me a part of himself I never knew existed. Because the very first fund I ever launched was nearly destroyed by competitors with deeper pockets and fewer morals than Sienna could ever dream of. I didn't just fend them off. His voice grew hard, losing every trace of its charm. I systematically dismantled their firm until it was sold for parts. A completely different kind of chill ran down my spine, one that had nothing to do with fear. It was clarity. Arthur Vance wasn't just a successful financier, he was a predator. 2 days later, I gathered every ounce of strength I had to appear at the museum's annual benefit. I would not allow our son to absorb the terror that had taken root deep in my soul, the profound exhaustion, the feeling that our whole world was about to break apart. I manufactured a serene expression, rested a hand on my growing belly, and entered the grand ballroom of the St. Regis, a world of glittering chandeliers and insincere smiles. Arthur should be here, a voice inside me said. My heart clenched. I know, my love, I whispered back to my unborn baby. He gave a small kick, a quiet response that felt impossibly wise for someone who had not yet seen the world. It's all right. I just wish he wanted to build a family as much as he wants to build an empire. I swallowed past the lump in my throat. Me too, my sweet boy. The benefit was a sea of polite conversation, the chime of crystal flutes, and the mingling scents of expensive florals. For a fleeting moment, I believed the charity auction might pass without incident, but tranquility has become a luxury in my life, and that fantasy evaporated the moment the main bidding began. In walked Arthur Vance, the Prince of Wall Street, but he was not alone. Sienna Dubois, the art world's latest darling, was on his arm, poured into a severe black gown. Her confident smile, a silent challenge to everyone in the room. A hush fell over the gilded ballroom. Donors started whispering into their phones. Society bloggers subtly raised their devices. When Arthur's eyes finally found me across the sea of auction paddles, and floral centerpieces, his expression held no guilt, only cold calculation. He started moving in my direction, a shark that had just spotted its prey. My closest friend squeezed my hand, a quiet gesture of solidarity. "It's okay, little one," I murmured to my belly. "Mommy is fine." Arthur arrived, his voice a perfect performance of feigned worry. "There you are." I was getting worried. His words were for the benefit of the watching crowd. I turned my head just enough that his kiss met only air. I did not return his smile. "Why here, Arthur?" I asked, my voice surprisingly firm, despite the storm inside me. He acted baffled. "What do you mean?" "It's the museum's most important fundraising night of the year." "I mean the painting," I said, my voice dropping. "The one by Moreau. Why did you have to buy it for her tonight?" Sienna, sensing trouble, moved closer. "Arthur, darling, the Guggenheim curator is waving you over." I kept my eyes locked on my husband. "The painting for our son's nursery, the one we chose together. It will look beautiful in her apartment." Arthur's face became a rigid mask, the charming facade finally shattering as the weight of my words landed. "Just deal with it." The entire grand ballroom seemed to lurch sideways. I couldn't get enough air. Before I could process anything, the auctioneer, trying to salvage the rapidly deteriorating atmosphere, cleared his throat into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, our next item is a beautiful piece." Arthur leaned in, his whisper like a shard of ice in my ear. "You did this to yourself." He straightened his tie, shot a look of pure fury at Sienna, and attempted to regain his public composure. But I was frozen, paralyzed by the horrifying truth that this was not just the revelation of an affair. This was my trial by social media. A hush fell over the tech world of New York as the first shocked whispers became a roar of notifications. 1,000 phone screens lit up, their glare shifting from the massive monitor behind the stage to my 8 months pregnant form and back again. My husband, Julian, the celebrated founder of Aura Innovations, was being publicly dismantled, and I was collateral damage. I forced a smile, a brittle, painful thing, as my world fractured in real time. I could practically feel the room's opinion shifting, the silent verdicts being rendered. The air grew thick with the stench of scandal. As the influencer on stage, Katerina, preened for the cameras, she tapped the smart bracelet on her wrist. The screen protector, a custom photo, became crystal clear for everyone to see. A candid shot of her and Julian. "Our new Aura Band is about authentic connection," the event host stammered, losing his place entirely, his eyes glued to the damning image on the Jumbotron. "It showcases how a single vision can bring people closer, more intimately than ever before." A wave of gasps spread through the audience. The venture capitalists and tech journalists were no longer looking at the product. They were staring at Julian. My heart hammered against my ribs. Julian had gone ghost white, his face a tight mask of fury. He looked like he was about to vomit, but the product's tagline hung in the air above him, more damning than any accusation. "Aura, know what's real." He couldn't spin this, he couldn't escape it. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I gripped the back of a chair, my knuckles turning white. Julian stared at Katerina's wrist, as if his gaze alone could shatter the device. I don't want a man who builds a digital empire. I want a man who can build a family with me. The thought was a silent scream in my mind. Julian finally hissed at his head of security, "Get her off the stage." But the reputational damage was done. The host muttered a frantic apology, and the live feed was cut, but the image from that bracelet was already a viral screenshot, seared into the memory of the entire industry. The lack of applause was deafening. Guests looked anywhere but at us, their hushed commentary a volley of poison aimed at the man whose name was on the building. For the first time, I saw something in Julian truly crack. Not his composure, but his ego. Katerina rushed to his side, her own face pale with panic, speaking in a low, urgent tone. But Julian didn't seem to see her. His gaze was locked on me, desperate, furious, and utterly exposed. He looked like a master coder watching his own perfect program get devoured by a virus he had created. And as I met his stare, holding onto that chair to keep from collapsing, I knew his flawless public persona wasn't the only thing that had been corrupted tonight. With that one image, he had erased every line of code that held our life together. The launch party devolved into a stunned, icy silence. Investors and partners made for the exits, their faces a mix of pity and disgust, refusing to meet my eyes. Tech bloggers were already live streaming their hot takes from the lobby. And Julian just stood there, his hands clenched into fists, his jaw set so tight it looked like it might break. Katerina tugged at his sleeve. "Julian, let's go. Everyone is filming this." But he was paralyzed. I retreated toward the catering area, where a woman from our early startup days held out a bottle of water for me. Sinking onto a crate, my hands instinctively went to my belly, a futile shield against the fallout. "I'm so sorry, little one," I pleaded silently. "I am so sorry." "Ilara," a raw voice said behind me. "We have to talk." I didn't have to turn around. Julian was there, his presence filling the small space. His face was a chaotic storm of emotions. Guilt, rage, terror, and a pathetic sliver of hope were twisted into a mask I didn't recognize anymore. "I need a private word with my wife," Julian said through gritted teeth. I just shook my head. "Not right now." Katerina pushed forward, her expression dripping with contempt. "Oh, for God's sake, Ilara, stop the performance. Just hear him out." Her words were sliced off by a voice that was quiet, deep, and held absolute power. She said no. Liam, our lead investor and a titan of Silicon Alley, had placed himself between us, a calm and unbreachable wall. The few remaining industry players who saw him knew him instantly. His name was whispered, and their glances toward Julian became even harder, colder. Liam spoke to me gently. "Ilara, are you okay?" I could only manage a nod, my voice trapped in a fog of shock. Julian turned on him, his anger reignited. "This is a family matter." Liam took a deliberate step closer, his voice low and sharp as glass. "Exposing your pregnant wife to this level of public stress is a significant health risk. That makes it my business. Someone has to prioritize her and the baby. It's obvious you're not." Julian's face flushed with a mixture of indignation and profound humiliation. "She's my wife." "Then it's about time you started treating her like it," Liam replied, his tone final. The enormous event space fell utterly still. Even the cleanup crew paused, their hands full of abandoned cocktail glasses. For a second, Julian looked like he might throw a punch. But then, all the fight just drained out of him. His shoulders slumped, his chin trembled, and his eyes darted around the room, unable to face the steady gaze of the man who had just demonstrated what true strength looked like. Katerina crossed her arms, her lip curled in disgust. "Come on, Julian. You're being pathetic." But he was frozen in place. He just stood there, a hollowed-out version of the tech genius he was meant to be. And in that moment, I knew Liam wasn't trying to be a white knight. He was simply filling the void where a good man should have been standing all along. As the last of the guests fled into the cool New York night, some shot me brief, sympathetic glances. Most just hurried away, desperate to share the gossip. Julian remained motionless in the center of the venue, as if the ghosts of those digital images had him pinned to the spot. Katerina had finally abandoned him, the sharp click of her heels echoing her rage as she stormed out alone. I stayed in the back, concentrating on taking slow, deep breaths, willing my racing heart to calm down. This much adrenaline wasn't good for a baby. Liam stayed nearby, his posture relaxed but watchful, a silent guardian standing between me and the smoldering wreckage of my marriage. At last, Julian moved, not toward the door, but toward me. He stopped several feet away and sank to his knees. The few remaining staff members froze what they were doing, sensing the weight of the moment. "Alara," Julian choked out, his voice broken. I saw the look on your face." I looked at him, feeling nothing but a deep, profound exhaustion. The entire world saw it. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "I did that to you." The confession filled the silence. Julian swallowed hard, his voice shaking with a weakness I hadn't heard since we were two kids, coding in a garage, with nothing but a dream. "I made an unforgivable error. I hurt you. I never, ever meant to hurt you like this." His face was a portrait of anguish. "Then why, Julian? Why her?" The question was barely audible, but it hit him like a physical blow. His entire body seemed to cave in on itself. Because I was arrogant, and I was careless, and I was a complete and utter fool. My breath hitched. In 15 years, the great Julian Vance had never, not once, admitted to being a fool. Humiliated by the audience, the venue manager tried to discreetly wave his crew away, but Julian was oblivious. He knelt on the polished concrete floor of my tiny new apartment, the air heavy with regret. "I know there's no way to fix what I've done," Julian rasped, "but I want to try to earn a path back to you, if you'll let me." Our son, Leo, watched him with the wide, uncomplicated eyes of a 5-year-old, trying to understand a catastrophic adult failure. "Are you sorry you made Mommy sad?" Leo asked softly. "Yes," Julian choked out, his composure finally disintegrating. "More than you will ever know." A deep, painful silence filled the small room. Then Leo spoke a sentence that felt like the ground splitting open between us. "I forgive you, Daddy, but I want to stay here with Mommy." Julian squeezed his eyes shut, the devastation on his face absolute. From the phone on the counter, a notification from Katerina's Instagram account chimed loudly. "Live now." My side of the story. He slowly pushed himself to his feet, but he seemed diminished, smaller, the layers of his powerful CEO armor stripped away. He gave me one last look, his eyes screaming a novel's worth of regret. But there were no words left. Forgiveness was for my own healing, not for his redemption. As he walked out the door, completely alone, a strange sense of peace settled over me. The incredible power he once held in my world was gone, dismantled by an influencer's ambition and the simple, undeniable truth. And for the first time, I could clearly see the new life that was waiting for me. After the last of the staff had finally left, I walked out of the venue and into the crisp city air. I felt drained and raw, but also incredibly clear, like a high fever had finally broken. I leaned my head against a cool steel support beam, breathing deeply, and brought my hand to my mouth, kissing the bare skin where my wedding ring used to be. "She's going to be a force of nature," a calm voice said beside me. I turned my head. Leo was leaning against the terrace railing, the San Francisco fog swirling around him, his calm demeanor the only steady thing in my world. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the door. "She shouldn't have to be part of this," I whispered, my hand on my stomach. "No," he said softly, "but she will be, because you are her mother." For the first time in what felt like a year, a real warmth spread through my chest. I didn't feel like a fool. I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel like a victim in the slightest. I just felt quiet. Perhaps revealing Julian's affair at the fundraiser wasn't a victory. Perhaps it wasn't the end of the story. But the truth, finally out in the open, had lifted an impossible weight from me, a secret I had been forced to carry all by myself. "What am I supposed to do now?" I asked the fog. Leo moved to my side. "Now, you stop trying to manage the damage, and you start writing your own story." A tired, hollow laugh escaped my lips. "That feels 1,000 times harder." "Then you let the people who care about you help," he answered, his voice gentle. "Let me call you a car." I looked up into his eyes and saw only genuine care and immense respect. There wasn't a trace of pity. He wasn't a savior or a knight in shining armor. He was just a truly decent man who stayed standing when my entire world had crumbled. "The museum board meeting," I said, remembering where we had first connected. A small smile touched Leo's lips. "I am very glad I decided to join. Just give me your word, and the directorship is yours." I agree. The words came not from a place of fear or desperation, but from a deliberate choice to create a life where my child and I would be safe, honored, and genuinely loved. Leo released a long, slow breath, one he seemed to have been holding for a while. "That's wonderful. There is, however, one final piece." My stomach gave a nervous flip. He reached into his messenger bag and slid not a contract, but a large roll of architectural drawings across the table. They felt heavy in my hands, full of possibility. "Those are for the new Youth Arts Pavilion," he explained, his eyes bright with passion. "A completely clean slate. It will be entirely your vision. You have more than earned the right to build a better narrative." Tears started to sting my eyes. "Leo." He reached out, and with his thumb, softly wiped away a tear from my cheek. The touch was simple, profoundly kind, and spoke volumes. "You don't need to rebuild your whole world in a day," he said gently, "but when you feel ready, I would be honored to help you design it." A powerful wave of peace washed over me. Not anxiety, not terror, but a deep, profound calm. A real beginning. All I could do was nod, and for the first time in forever, the future didn't feel like an impossible mountain to scale. It felt like an open, sunlit space, waiting to be filled with art. As Leo walked me to the curb, the early morning sun warming my skin, I understood this wasn't just a second act. This was the life I was finally choosing for myself. And that is the point where this particular story finds its conclusion. The last page has been turned. If you've remained with us, following this journey from its painful start to its hopeful end, it is likely because some part of this experience spoke to you. Perhaps you recognized a piece of your own story in Eliza's reclaimed power. Maybe you heard the wisdom in Leo's quiet support. Or perhaps you simply saw that true healing isn't about winning a fight, but about choosing to believe in your own worth over and over again. And you see, the great Stoic thinkers taught that you have control over your mind, not over the events around you. This is the very lesson we have just witnessed. Their suffering did not break them. The betrayals they endured did not get to dictate their tomorrows. They made the choice to find their footing on solid ground. As the Emperor Marcus Aurelius once said, "The mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting." If this narrative has given you anything, let it be this powerful truth. You deserve to be at peace. You have the right to be treated with respect. And you have the right to a future that is built on truth, not on deceptions. If this story gave you even a small measure of encouragement or a moment of clarity, please consider showing your support by liking this video, sharing it with another person who might be facing their own challenges, and subscribing to continue having these conversations with us. Because your own journey matters, and your best chapters are still waiting to be written. Just a brief reminder for all of you with us today, This story is a work of fiction, created solely for the purpose of exploring human emotions and inspiring self-reflection. Any similarity to real people or actual events is purely coincidental. Our goal is to delve into themes of resilience, personal strength, and the hard choices life presents, not to depict the private lives of any individuals. We craft these narratives to provide some comfort, a spark of hope, and a quiet space to think about our own lives with kindness and grace. Thank you for listening so openly and for being such a valued member of this community.